Welcome back. Today, I'm going to give you another installment in my series From Bite to Burn about GLP-1 and GIP hormones. Today, it's about how gut hormones protect your heart. That's right, we're talking about my favorite topic, heart health. So let's get started. Most people know medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, or Zepbound as weight loss or diabetes medications. But what they're really doing is something far bigger. These medications, which mimic gut hormones like GLP-1 and GIP, are transforming how we think about heart health. Today, we're going to explore how these hormones, released after every meal, evolved to talk directly to the heart and blood vessels, and how modern medicine is harnessing that connection to fight heart attacks, strokes, and heart failure. To understand how, we first need to step back and look at how the body fuels itself at rest, during exercise, and after a meal. So at rest, skeletal muscle and the heart look similar on the surface, but serve different roles. Skeletal muscle is mostly idle, waiting for demand. At rest, it burns fatty acids or fats as its main fuel, and that's a steady, slow-burning source of energy. The heart, on the other hand, never rests. It beats nonstop, and its mitochondria are packed to generate ATP around the clock. Now, at baseline, the heart also favors fatty acids because they provide the most energy over time. That helps keeping the pump running for decades without pause. But things change with activity. When skeletal muscle contracts at lower moderate intensity, it still leans heavily on fatty acids. But as intensity rises, it pivots towards glucose because glucose can generate ATP much more quickly, even if it costs more oxygen. Now, the heart works differently. Even in exercise, it still uses a lot of fatty acids. But when oxygen becomes tight in very high demand, or ischemia or narrowed arteries, it leans towards glucose. Why? Because glucose yields more ATP per molecule of oxygen. For the heart, it's not about speed, it's about survival when oxygen is limited. Now let's look at what happens after a meal. Blood glucose rises. The body now has a choice. Where does that sugar go? Most of it is handled by the skeletal muscles. Insulin, amplified by GLP-1 and GIP, pulls glucose into the muscle cells, where it's stored as glycogen or burned for immediate energy. At the same time, these hormones suppress fat mobilization from adipose tissue or fat tissue. That keeps fatty acids out of the bloodstream so they don't compete with glucose for oxidation, which is what's making energy. It's a brilliant safeguard. Use and store the sugar now, prevent overload, and keep the system balanced. The heart also increases its use of glucose after a meal. It doesn't store much. Instead, it's burning glucose directly for energy. This isn't about clearing sugar from the blood, because muscle's already doing most of that. For the heart, it's about staying flexible and aligned with the nutrients being delivered. Oxygen is plentiful after a meal, so leaning into glucose is safe, and it helps the heart avoid excess fat use when nutrients are abundant. This raises an important evolutionary question. If GLP-1 and GIP medications can provide continuous benefits without causing hypoglycemia, why didn't the bodies evolve to keep these hormones active all the time? The answer lies in trade-offs. Incretins, or what those two hormones are called collectively, were never designed as baseline regulators. They were built as nutrient signals, sharp, meal-linked bursts that tell the body food is here, shift metabolism accordingly. Then they quickly vanish. That brevity is a feature, not a flaw, because in a feast and famine environment where our ancestors went long stretches without food, having GLP-1 and GIP always active would have been harmful. Continuous incretin activity would have kept insulin tone high, suppressed fat release, and blocked ketone production. And those are exactly the tools the body needs to survive when fasting. So evolution favored short-lived incretin spikes after meals and silence in between. That design solved the survival problem in a world where starvation was the biggest threat. Today, our problem isn't famine, at least not in the developed world. It's chronic overnutrition, diabetes, and heart disease. That's why incretin drugs were engineered with longer half-lives. They extend that natural signal not because evolution missed something, but because the environment changed. What was once a steady incretin tone is now protective because our challenge is no longer surviving starvation, but surviving the long-term effects of excess fuel. And here's where the mitochondria, the engine rooms of our cells, come into focus. The mitochondria aren't just power plants. They're also a source of oxidative stress. Think of it as sparks flying off an engine. In small amounts, those sparks are fine. But if glucose is the dominant long-term fuel, the sparks accumulate into oxidative stress, driving inflammation and vascular damage. Fatty acid oxidation is different. It yields less ATP per oxygen, but it runs cleaner over a long haul. It's like a slow-burning fuel that keeps the engine going with fewer sparks. That's why, under normal physiology, the heart prefers fat as its baseline fuel, and skeletal muscle leans heavily on fat at rest. The problem comes when mitochondria can't handle the fat properly. In insulin resistance or diabetes, fatty acids flood in faster than they can be oxidized. Toxic intermediates accumulate, impairing insulin signaling and make muscle less able to switch fuels. The same overload in the heart stresses mitochondria, lowers ATP yield, and increases that oxidative stress and free radicals. This is where GLP and GIP therapies shine. In skeletal muscle, they reduce fatty acid spillover from that fatty tissue and improve mitochondrial capacity, so fat is burned more cleanly. That restores flexibility, fat at rest, glucose in action. In the heart, even though GLP-1 receptors may not sit directly on the muscle cells, the benefits come indirectly. Better vascular function means steadier oxygen supply. Lower fatty acid overload means cleaner mitochondrial metabolism. The result is a heart that can pivot to use glucose under oxygen stress, but still return to fat for long-term efficiency. So while skeletal muscle and the heart may look alike, they're being pushed in slightly different directions. One supported in fat oxidation and the other supported in glucose use. They make the whole cardiovascular system more resilient. And these different priorities aren't just theory. They show up in real clinical outcomes. In the LEADER trial, patients taking liraglutide had fewer cardiovascular deaths. In SUSTAIN 6, semaglutide reduced strokes. In REWIND, dulaglutide prevented heart attacks and strokes even in people without established heart disease. And the SELECT trial, published in 2023, enrolled over 17,000 people with obesity and cardiovascular disease, but no diabetes. With semaglutide, heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular deaths fell by 20%. That's huge. These changes lined up perfectly with biology. A heart that can pivot to glucose when it needs to, vessels that are healthier, and a body that burns fat more cleanly. And this is where we can expand even more because the effects of GLP-1 and GIP on the cardiovascular system don't stop at fuel selection. Let's think about the endothelium, the single cell layer lining every blood vessel. It may be thin, but it controls everything from blood pressure to clotting. GLP-1 and GIP improve endothelial function by boosting nitric oxide, that natural vasodilator and anti-inflammatory compound. That means arteries relax more easily, blood flow improves, and the heart gets better oxygen delivery. It's like giving the circulatory system a smoother road to drive on. These hormones also reduce arterial stiffness. With age and disease, arteries become more rigid, forcing the heart to pump harder. GLP-1 therapies lower inflammation and oxidative stress in the vessel wall, making arteries more elastic. That's not just numbers on the blood pressure cuff. That's less strain on the heart itself. Another critical effect is plaque stabilization. Atherosclerosis can be dangerous as plaque build up, but they can be even more dangerous as they can rupture and trigger heart attacks or strokes. GLP-1 reduces LDL oxidation, calms down inflamed LDLs and strengthens that fibrous cap that maintains stability on the plaques. In simple terms, plaques are less likely to crack and cause a catastrophe. And then there's inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation drives every step. GLP-1 and GIP signaling lowers inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha while improving markers like C-reactive protein. At the same time, they promote healing pathways that repair damaged tissue. Put it all together and you get a system-wide tune-up. The heart is safer under stress. Skeletal muscle is cleaner and more flexible. Blood vessels are more responsive. Arteries are less stiff. Plaque are more stable, and inflammation is quieter. That's why these medications don't just change the scale or blood sugar. They cut heart attacks. They cut strokes, and they save lives. So here's the takeaway. What started as a simple survival signal, a burst of hormones released after eating, has become one of the most powerful tools in modern medicine. GLP-1 and GIP remind us that the gut and the heart have always been in conversation. Evolution built that connection to help us survive from meal to meal. Today, medicine is extending that signal to help us survive decade to decade. These therapies don't just change numbers on a scale or blood sugar, they change how our muscles store energy, how our heart uses oxygen, and how our vessels respond to stress. In addition, how inflammation is quieted over the whole system. If you remember nothing else, remember this. GLP-1 and GIP medications are not just diabetes or weight loss drugs, they are heart protection drugs. Thanks for watching. These are some of my favorite topics. If you learned something and enjoyed this, please hit the like button. If you know someone that could benefit from this information, please share it with them. And if you want to hear more, hit subscribe. I also love comments and questions. Leave them in the comments section. Thanks again, and see you next time.